All right, Miss Susan, we are live.
Happy to be back, Sharon.
You're gonna get an award as the most visited person on TikTok. This is your
I'm happy
third
to accept.
visit. Yes,
I'll thank all of our fans.
Yes. Third visit, and we know who's counting because we know we're going to be doing more. But it's because the work that you do is so important. As a marriage and family therapist, you deal with all kinds of issues. Not just cancer just being one of the things that one of the stressors in life. But today we're going to talk about. You're going to give us some tools on how to handle chronic anxiety, because we know that that's not at all confined to cancer. It's just it's life. It's life. And at my age, I just feel like the anxiety that we're seeing in the world today, I don't know, it's almost like an epidemic, right? Yeah. So when I was growing up as a young person, high school, I was just never anxious. I didn't see, there was no one having anxiety issues, right? No one having anxiety issues. We were having other issues, but it wasn't anxiety. And today I'm seeing anxiety issues from elementary school, almost maybe preschool, elementary, high, and I know there's this, I think, being taught around in Congress about the role of social media with girls. And we're not going to touch on that today, but it just goes to show how much anxiety and stress is on the radar. But today we're going to touch on, generally speaking, but we're going to specifically talk about handling anxiety, pre-diagnosis, during diagnosis, and post, because we know it never quite goes away once you've had that diagnosis. So, Suzanne, I'm going to have you reintroduce yourself to the audience, and then you can get back in and start to teach us.
Yes, and you're going to have to pardon me. I'm just getting over a sore throat and a cough, so pardon the occasional cough. But I'm Susan Block, as you mentioned, Sharon. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist located in South Florida. I run Coral Springs Counseling Center, which is a group telehealth mental health practice. We specialize in working with couples and adult individuals going through all various life struggles: anxiety, depression, grief and loss, divorce, you name it, we're there for them. And we are a team of 6 now in the practice, and we work with people all over the state of Florida. So I'm happy to be back, and this is a topic that I'm just so passionate about. So thanks for having me again.
Yes. I was mentioning to Susan earlier before we got on live that, I had every day there are causes every day that brings you anxiety. Just losing the electricity in this Airbnb I'm staying at was cause for anxiety because it kicked out my internet. It kicked out my power. I was hot, and I knew I had to be on live today. And so that moment of panic. And so we want tools to okay, how do we de-escalate that stuff? How do we de-escalate just the natural stressors of life that we can actually be functional? So yeah. I'm a student today.
Yes. And you know what? I'll say this, so am I. I'm not immune to anxiety. Just a little transparency. I had a phobia of flying for many, many, many years. And I did some treatment around it, and it to the point where I wouldn't fly. And I share this with you, with the audience, because I worked really hard to overcome the phobia. It still makes me uneasy, but I get on planes, I fly, I travel. I just got back from Vegas a couple of weeks ago, and I use my own techniques when I'm flying. So I like to share that because I want people to know that this stuff does work, and I use it myself. And I also want to just say that the tips that I'm going to share today are general. Each person's experience is individualized, and they may vary. And it's just always a good idea to consult with your own healthcare professional for any personal advice based on your specific needs. So I just wanted to, start with that today. But I'm just going to really jump in and just start with an exercise that I have found to be life-changing for myself and for my clients. This can be if you're struggling with a diagnosis or really just struggling with any type of trauma or anxiety, anything that's kind of amping up the emotions quickly. And it's called a bilateral tapping technique. There's many variations of it. The short name for it is the butterfly technique. And what that means is if you were to take your hands and you shape them like a butterfly wings, and you just gently put them in kind of like this little area between your shoulders and like the middle of your chest. So just right here, and you just gently tap back and forth. You don't want to tap your hands at the same time because it's called a bilateral tapping technique, which means you're stimulating both sides of the brain. When there's anxiety or like any type of sudden trauma, it's really about processing like traumatic memories or helping to process fears or future worries. And that can happen in a flash. So what we need, if we're going from like 0 to 10 with our anxiety, we need a quick way to regulate. And so by doing this tapping technique can just like help your brain to reset very quickly. 30 seconds, a minute is all you need. And when you're doing it, you're just taking some deep breaths in. Okay. You can tap your shoulders if that's more comfortable. You can even be sitting with a group of people and you put your hands on your knees and you're just gently tapping back and forth on your knees. So it's the back and forth, that rhythm that creates that regulation quickly. It's not going to take the situation and make it better.
Right.
It's not going to, make the diagnosis go away. But what it will do is it will just help to kind of regulate quickly so that maybe you go from a 10 to, let's say, a 6 or a 5, so that it's a little bit more manageable. So that is one technique. I use it all the time when I'm driving, and I don't like to drive on bridges or ramps. I will sit with my hands on a steering wheel and I will just tap back and forth while I'm driving, as long as I'm still safe and comfortable to do so.
Susan, I'm going to have to maybe become a patient because you mentioned a couple of things already. Flying is one, and total health. My work here has dragged me out of hibernation. Right, I hadn't flown for 30 years by myself prior to working here, and the last time I had flown was 12 years ago with someone, and I had actually flown to New York and took the train back. This is how bad it was, right? And I had flown to New York from Florida and took the train back to Florida. It took me 2 days to get back home.
Been there myself. Yep.
So when you mentioned that, I was like, God, there goes my girl. And then when you mentioned about bridges, and when you're driving, I have the same phobia. I hate those big bridges, and it gives me a lot of sweaty palms. So this is a technique I will be definitely trying, because the patting feels like when I pat my dog down during a lightning storm or something. And it calms him down. So it just feels like, or my granddaughter, it feels like you're just patting yourself down. So I'm liking that. So great, perfect. All right, that was tip number 1. And Peter said his wife needs surprise when he's driving. Not just that, Peter's also a non-flyer. So hopefully, Peter, the tapping butterflies for you too.
Butterflies for everyone.
For all the butterflies for everyone. Okay.
Well, really, what anxiety is a loss of control.
Yes.
Okay. So and this kind of leads me back into, if you're all of a sudden getting a sudden diagnosis of some kind, that's a lack of control. So my next tip actually is about finding what you can control in an uncontrollable time in your life. So you might not be able to control what's going on in your body, which can be very alarming. but we have to figure out ways that we can get on top of the things we can control. And what I mean by that, first of all, is okay, I know what works for me to regulate any heightened anxiety. I might create a Google Doc of questions. So let's say I get a diagnosis and then I don't have another doctor's appointment for a couple of weeks, let's say. You're waiting for results to come back. So instead of going on to WebMD, like a lot of people like to do, and then freak themselves out and cause more anxiety, is anytime you have a question, go into your Google Doc and start creating a list of questions, or keep a notepad by your bedside, in the car, next to the shower, because I know when I'm in the shower, I'm always thinking. We have our places that we kind of like, our brains kind of wander. So if you know there are certain moments in the day that you're going to be thinking and needing to look up stuff, write the questions down instead. And that way you can bring your list of questions with you. You feel on top of your visit, even in an uncontrollable time.
That's a good point. And as you're talking about that, we are at Total Health and at Cancer Equity, we're working on this journey map, on this compass journey map for that very reason. And you're just giving me more ammunition right now because, to show me the use of the absolute use of it. Because like you said, a diagnosis comes with anxiety and lack of control, lack of answers. And the times in between the visit can be very, very lengthy. And so our map aims to do that, to at least answer some questions, or at least give you some guidelines so that you can ask your doctor certain questions, like start here, here's where you're at, and here's the next steps, so kind of guiding you along the way so you feel less anxious and more in the know. And so I love what you say. It's probably something that we could put in our copy, get more control, as we put in a copy of how we're going to promote the map. It gives you more control over your situation. So I really do like that.
Yeah. And I think just adding to what you can control, anxiety is real. It should never be minimized. The diagnosis should never be minimized, or the waiting period that you're going through for a diagnosis should never be minimized. But what we can do is we can manage the anxiety that pops up that kind of is debilitating, and it's paralyzing for a lot of people. And so some of the tools that you can do is recognize anxiety when you can. So you might, I use the shower as an example because this happens to me. I'll be washing my hair and your mind's kind of going through the day, and you start daydreaming a little bit. You're kind of relaxing, and all of a sudden you start to think about, okay, all the things I didn't get to do today, or all the things I still need to do, or I should have said this, or I should have done that. When we can start to catch that as anxious thinking or spiraling thinking, we want to name it. We want to go, oh, okay, there's anxiety. And it took me a little bit, but now I recognize I'm in it. I'm in an episode. I'm in an anxious episode. So we want to catch it. We want to call it out. So we can call it anxiety with a capital A. You can name the anxiety. I have clients that name it like a villain in a movie. Give it a real name. Like, I see you. I see you're here. And we want to catch it. We want to call it out. And then we want to get grounded. And what I mean by that is we want to trick the brain to kind of create a little distraction from the anxiety. Some of the quick ways you can do that is counting backwards. So you can start from 50 and you can count backwards by threes. Because what you're doing is you're having to think about, okay, if I start at 50, okay, 47, and I keep counting back, but I have to give that a little bit of thought. It's a very mundane thing that you're doing by counting backwards, it doesn't really have any emotional connection to anything. And instantly it helps your brain to distract from the anxiety and kind of get you grounded and centered to what you're doing in the moment.
I
This
love that.
is,
That's a great, yeah.
yeah, I use it on the plane all the time. So when I'm about to take off, because takeoff is my worst time, and
Yes.
I'm out of control, there might be 9 planes ahead that need to take off. So we're sitting in it waiting, and I have no idea when we're taking off. So I'm like, I do the counting backwards. I will also do my 5 senses. So, okay, what are 5 things I can see right now? And you name 5 things that you can see. What are 4 things that I can hear? 3 things that I can touch? 2 things that I can smell? And 1 thing I can taste, even if it's just your own saliva. Because your 5 senses is what's going to keep you grounded in the present moment. And that's where we need to be to reduce anxiety.
Wow, I love those tips. I'm going to have to earmark this particular video to revisit it again. There's a question, I think it's a good question. So I think a lot of cancer patients may want to try and manage your anxiety on their own without taking drugs. I do love these techniques, but when is it time to see a doctor and get on medication for chronic anxiety?
Great question. Thank you so much, Peter, for asking this. This is a question I go through with my own clients. Like, how do we know when it's time to seek maybe some psychiatric care? That's if these techniques are just not cutting it. If you are not eating, if you are not sleeping, or you're falling asleep, but you're waking up and it's becoming, chronic, where it's, weeks are going by and you cannot get it together, then it's time to really have a conversation with your primary care physician, or go to a reputable psychiatrist. And I say that because, just like any other specialist, there's really good, people out there who are doing the good work. And then there are some that we might not recommend as much. So do your research, make sure you get some recommendations from your therapist, or maybe some other friends or family who have used someone that is reputable. And at that point, it might be time to try out some medication to help.
So seeing a therapist, like you said, if you're not sleeping, if it's, if it's debilitating, if it's somehow precluding you from even working, that's the time you're saying to engage with maybe like a psychiatrist or psychologist. And then they will then, at that point, after maybe having some sessions with you, be able to recommend if you need to go to that next step of medication. You don't just ask your doctor for some Xanax, is what you're saying. Don't just do that. That's not your first go-to.
Yeah, I think you can, but I think there are certain steps. What happens with medication is that can create a new set of anxiety, because medication is a lot of trial and error. And so if you are going on an anti-anxiety or anti-depressive, the trial and error is like, is this dosage the proper dosage for what I'm going through? Can my body handle the prescription?
Right.
Is this the right medication for what I have going on? So, and sometimes the medication can take a few weeks to kick in. And you want to make sure you're really being monitored during those times, because there are side effects to medications. And so you just need to make sure you're being closely monitored anytime you're starting something, a new medication.
Good point. All right. I know you have some more tips for us. And one of the things I want to ask you, but this can come at the end if you have time, is the role of exercise. But I don't know if that's going to come up. If not, let's go with your tips. Yeah.
So I think we also have to look at, like, when you do get a diagnosis and you start treatment, how do you manage anxiety during treatment when you're, physically maybe not up to speed, maybe not able to do some of the typical things that you like to do, whether it's going out with friends or exercising, things like that, you kind of have to find your rhythm. And I'd love your input on this as well, Sharon. When you're going through treatment, I have a very close friend of mine. Her dad is actually going through chemo right now. And what I've learned from their experience is he goes for a certain number of treatments and then he has a break. And he has learned his rhythm with treatment. So the week that he's going for treatment, he's pretty tired, pretty exhausted.
Right.
But that following week, he has more energy. So he's able to get out a little bit. He's actually planning some trips with friends, but he plans it on those off weeks because he knows he'll have more energy. So just really getting into your own rhythm with your treatment can be really helpful. And that's the way to stay in control and manage the anxiety as well.
For a little bit of input. So I didn't do chemo, I did radiation. But what I did, radiation was always early in the morning. You typically 8:30. And it was very quick. When I got back from radiation, what I would do, I'd go for my power walks. So I would walk in, I had a little park that I would walk in, and because the doctors told me, you're going to get tired. You're going to get tired. Honestly, I never got tired. And I think why I never got tired is because I didn't go home and sit in it. I went home and I went for walks, and, I'm a, person of faith. So I will do my power walk and my prayer time and sing and, listen to music and pump myself up. And then get back to work, so I stayed busy. So that was a way that I was able to put the difficult situation of the stress to the side, right? And and I wasn't in denial because the next day I had to go back to radiation. But it was almost like when you said naming it, anxiety for what it is, and saying, you're not going to defeat me today. And kind of like talking to myself, talking through it. Yeah. And so what your friend is doing by on his off week, being in community is just a way, like you said, to trick the mind, like I am still normal, I'm still okay. Yeah. So yes.
Absolutely. And, you hear this like mind-body connection people talk about.
Yes.
But mind-body connection is real. Our physical ailments can really stress us out and create some mental anguish, and vice versa. When we have mental issues, it can really create some physical ailments. Our immune system is weakened when we're not handling anxiety and depression in a healthy way. So it really makes sense, hearing you talk about going on those power walks. It really energizes you. It releases all of those natural hormones that are so needed for your health.
Question for you, Susan, and maybe we have to do another tea talk on this one about the mind-body connection, because I've done a lot of reading on that, right? And it tells you, for example, how just the stressors can create certain problems. I was talking to a team member this morning, and he was sharing that his particular condition, he was told that it came from stress. And this is a young person. And the doctors told him that his particular illness was stress generated. And my question to him was, if it was stress generated, if you unstress, can it be reversed? And in his case, he was told no. And so, that mind-body connection, the impact of stress on health is, I think we're only scratching the surface, because, what we're seeing with the prevalence and the, just the increase in illnesses for our young people, going back to what we said at the beginning, I think the onset of social media and all that pressure is just creating a lot of health havoc, like a health crisis with just these diseases that typically affect older people, not affecting younger people. But we know a big part of it is stress. So talks like these that help us to, give us tools how to just take it down a notch. Like you said, the situation will not change, but if we can just manage how we're going through it. quick point. Today, when I had the power outage at this Airbnb, I had brought some weights with me, and I decided to lift some weights, and because I was feeling very tense. And when I lifted the weights, and when I did some, some crunches and stuff, and my heart rate went really way up. Honestly, I'm not lying. The anxiety just was dispelled. It just went away. And so I'm like, wow, there's really a tie-in to sweating and having your heart rate go up and managing that, that anxiety and managing those cortisol that's being shut up in your body. And so it's so important. There's a question here. What is a recommendation in a dangerous situation where a friend or family member might be expressing to you thoughts of suicide after diagnosis, like cancer or any time?
Yeah, this is I had a feeling this question was going to come up. It's an important one. And, look, it's a sudden traumatic experience that you're going through. And no one, unfortunately, is immune to that potential risk. Things that family members can really keep an eye out for is just change in mood, making sure that someone is still engaging, and little signs to look out for if you see them start to disengage, with family events or family functions, checking in with them. I think what happens is people get hesitant to use the word suicide.
Right.
It's like the 4-letter word.
Yeah.
It's a word we don't want to talk about. It's okay to use it, to say, are you having suicidal thoughts? Are you having thoughts of killing yourself? If we don't talk about it, we're kind of fueling it in some ways. But when we talk about it, when we ask someone point blank, we're defusing it. It's like the thing we think is going to make it worse is actually going to make it better. So connect with your loved ones, ask them, having thoughts of wanting to escape from what the news is or the pain that they're going through. That's a normal reaction. We get scared enough. We don't want to feel the pain. We want to, avoid the dangerous situation. Having a thought about suicide does not mean you're going to be actively suicidal. It's suicidal ideation. We just want to make sure we're knowing the difference between, I wish this wasn't happening, I wish I wasn't feeling this, and I wish it would all go away, versus I have a plan and I have a specific plan of how I'm going to take my life. Really checking in with your loved ones, seeing if they have a plan. There is a national suicide hotline. 988 is the national suicide number. So knowing that there's 24/7 help out there. If you are a family member of someone who you think is suicidal, you can call the hotline and get information. If you yourself are going through that, there is help out there. Connect to your loved ones. Better to play it safe than sorry.
That's a good point. And I know we're at the end, and I do want you to address this one question, Susanna. Of course, that's why we always have you back, because we can never finish our conversation.
Cliffhangers.
We can never finish. But something you mentioned about the suicide, I think it's so good. And here's the reason why. For those of people out there who are watching, when you get a cancer diagnosis, I don't care who you are, one of the things that you think about initially is your death. Because the news, everything that you see is always about someone dying, not dying of cancer, not living beyond cancer, even though there are many people who live beyond cancer, live for decades. But that doesn't make the news too much, or it doesn't make the movies too much. What you hear is all the deaths. So the first thing you do is to put yourself in that, okay, so I am going to die. So you have that going on. So some people, as I remember talking to my integrative doctor, and she was saying, that she's seeing patients for therapy because they're contemplating, suicide and stuff. They can't handle it. And so I think what you mentioned, Susan, about just talking about it, it diffuses it, because now, because the person who is thinking about it is doing it secretly. Okay. But when you can speak to them about it, I think it puts it on the table. It's not so much of a boogeyman anymore, and can be talked through. Real quick, when my mom had a stroke, I remember in the hospital when I went to see her, she said, I don't want to live. I don't want to live with a stroke. She had made a decision, right? She had just found out she had a stroke. And she said, I don't want to live with a stroke. She said, I don't want to live. And I said, Mom, you have to decide today that you want to live, because here's the truth. You will still have value and worth to this world, because you can always pray. She was a woman of faith. So you can always pray and continue to encourage people. And she took about, honestly, it was the longest, maybe 4 minutes of my life, looking at me and just looking quiet. And she says, okay, I'll live. That was her decision. So just putting it on the table, the conversation, took away the power of the moment, so that we could have a conversation about living or dying. And so I think it was a very powerful point you made about, if you know someone that's, struggling with that, to bring it on the table and talk through it. Just talk through it. And the last question.
And just to minimize the stigma around it, because people are so worried if they bring it up that people are going to judge them. They're going to look down at them for it. To erase the stigma, because every single human being at some point or another has felt low.
Yes.
Okay. And no one's talking about it in the way that they should be, like we're doing. And so, and kind of like I shared about my flying fear, you were able to connect to that. People need to know you're struggling so that they can connect with you.
I agree. Great point. And Ilana said, sounds like having a therapist on your cancer team would be beneficial to patients. Is this something that is offered to all patients? I don't think it is at all. I don't think it's offered at all. But, Ilana, I can tell you, that's not offered in in a standard of care. I think when you go to integrative oncology, if you're lucky to be referred to that and your insurance covers it, they'll ask you, how are you feeling? How are you doing? Do you think you're going to need that support? That's the only place I think it's mentioned, because none of my other doctors ever mentioned it. So I think it may be something that, as we work in the medical community and we have these conferences, something we may want to bring up, because it is a real part of people's journey, that anxiety and that fear.
Yeah, I love having a therapist on your team when you are going through that. And there are therapists that actually specialize in medical conditions. So you can, if you live in an area that, maybe is a little more saturated with therapists, then you can find someone who actually specializes in this area.
Awesome. Susan, we're going to close, but we need one last tip, right? We need one last word from you to end Tea Talk, because Tea Talk is about the T cells, right? That's kind of how Sarah got the name. T cells are our happy cells. And so we want to leave the audience with maybe one last tip or one last statement from you that is going to help that anxious person look at anxiety in a more manageable way.
Yes. Support. I mean, we are human beings. We are wired for connection. We are not meant to be isolated and alone. Okay. If you think back to cavemen time, we were in communities. The women were all caring for the young, and all the men were out hunting together. It was a team. We still need the same things, but our world, our society has changed. We are more isolated than ever. So finding support, it can be online support. When I was going through fertility issues, I found a wonderful group of people all over the country that were going through a similar experience at that moment. And that really helped me. So find support, no matter if it's family, friends, strangers, a therapist, whoever it may be.
That is a great way to end. Community and support. That's going to be, something you put in your arsenal. Get in community, get support. Don't do this alone. It's too heavy. Share. Thank you so much, Susan. And we will see you again, I'm sure, within the next 6 weeks or so. All right, guys, for you guys who are watching Tea Talk, please, continue to ask questions in the feed. Susan and myself will answer as we see them pop up. Take care. Tomorrow we're back on with someone from Susan B. Coleman's helpline. We will be talking about the types of calls that they receive on the helpline, and honestly, the stats that they are going to show us. It's just mind-boggling. So, guys, we'll see you back here tomorrow at 2:00. Take care.
Bye-bye.